everybody, and welcome to the Isle of Wight Council Planning Committee on Tuesday the 27th of July 2021, held in the Council Chamber at County Hall. You've got me chairing this afternoon, Councillor Jeff Brodie as Vice Chairman of the Planning Committee. Welcome to members of the public and the press, and I'll introduce the officers who accompany the committee today. On the second left from me is Sarah Wilkinson, the planning team leader. Next to me on the left is Oliver Bolter, the strategic manager, planning and infrastructure. On my right, Ben Gard, legal advisor. And the lady just over there is Marie Bartlett, the committee clerk. We also have the other planning team leader, Mr. Russell Chick, and alongside him, Mr. Alan White, who is the highways representative from Island Roads. And finally, we have Paul Fuller, just over there, the furthest one away, who is the council's cabinet member for planning and housing. There are no planned fire drills during this meeting. If you hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route. The nearest escape route is via the signposted set of stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber or public gallery. Exit via the door at the back of the building, walk across the inner car park around the building to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. The lifts cannot be used in the event of an emergency. Please do not re-enter the building until you're advised it's safe to do so by a council member of staff. Can I ask everybody to have their mobile phones switched off or to mute? Can I request that everybody who speaks during the meeting uses the microphones that are in front of you? Can I ask that no food is consumed during the meeting unless it is for a medical need? I would remind councillors that they cannot leave the council chamber during the presentation on this application or debate. If they leave, they will be unable to vote on that application. I would remind members of the public that you are present purely to observe the process. I'm now going to run through the lighting system, which is a little bit more complex than usual, so I'll try and make it as straightforward as possible. When you're asked to speak, the green light will display. That's the one. However, if you've been allocated either 4 or 6 minutes to speak under new rules introduced by the council last week, the green light won't start until 1 minute after you commence speaking because of an absence of ability within the technology we're using today. Marie will use a stopwatch to time the first minute to make sure that everybody gets exactly the time they're entitled to. I hope that was reasonably clear. When you have 30 seconds left, leave the amber light will display. When the red light displays, I will stop you talking. This is to ensure that all parties receive the same amount of time and that the process is seen to be fair. I'll let you finish your sentence, but no, don't abuse that. Thank you. We'll move to the agenda. Firstly, have we got any apologies? I think we've got apologies from Councillor Mike Beston, Councillor Dave Adams, Councillor Rodney Downer, and Councillor Price is here, although he will not participate in any voting tonight. That is because he was unable to attend the whole of the site visit last Friday, which is something that is required within our code of practice. Moving on to the numbered agenda items. Number 1, the minutes, pages 3 to 6 in our agenda. Can I confirm as a true record the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of July? Thank you, Councillor Quirk and Councillor Oliver. I'll just sign them off. Item 2, declarations of interest. To invite members to declare any interest they may have in the matters on the agenda. Nothing? Thank you. Public question time. This is for a 15-minute maximum period. Questions are restricted to matters not on the agenda. Questions may be asked without notice, but to guarantee a full reply at the meeting, a question must be put, including the name and address of the questioner, by delivery in writing or by electronic mail to Democratic Services, no later than 2 clear working days before the start of the meeting. I don't think we've had any. No, thank you. Normally, planning committee is held on a Tuesday, etc. It says. Is there anybody in the gallery who would like to ask a question of the committee that doesn't relate to the item on the agenda tonight? No, silence. So we can move on. We will now move on to item 4, which is the report of the strategic manner for planning and infrastructure, pages 7 to 90. What will happen is that we will receive a presentation by Sarah Wilkinson, and we will then move to public speaking. I'll explain the order of that when we get there, though I think everybody here knows which order it will be. Okay, so I'll kick off by asking Sarah Wilkinson. Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. The application site, as shown by the red line on the slide in front of members, is an area of approximately 38.16 hectares. The site covers an area that runs with Apley Road to the north, Bullen Road to the south. If I can, you've got Apley Road to the north here, Bullen Road to the south, Hope Road and Circular Road, as well as Marlborough Road running to the east, and Calport Road along here to the northwest and west. I've also incorporated an aerial photograph of the site, again shown within the red line of both this plan and the previous plan. Members or councillors will note the area that occupies what the report either refers to as phase 1 or as Hope Road development, which is the kind of element that's already been undertaken and is under construction. What councillors will also note from this plan is the indication of the route of the footpath that runs both through Coathy Bottom Copse to the Westridge site, but also the footpath that we observed more directly on site that runs along the edge of this field boundary to access to the existing rights of way network. I have another plan to show that in more detail. Again, we've got the aerial photograph that I discussed that again shows those routes and the site in that format. This plan just shows that link, so members will note the proposed footway both through here to access Westridge, and then the footpath that runs through the edge of the field, along the field edge. At the site visit, the question was asked in terms of where that connects to and the purpose of it, and hopefully this plan shows the ways in which that connects to the surrounding rights of way network. I will just very, very briefly flick through some photographs that show the existing surrounding area, being Hope Road, and moving around the site and various different points. Members, we were on site on Friday, so I won't linger on these for long. You were all aware of what we're looking at, those being of the coach house, and then moving around to properties at Bullen Road and the access through to the site. This showing a panoramic of the site, and then at the bottom the garage that would be demolished on Marlborough Road that again we looked at on Friday. The application seeks consent for 473 dwellings. That would include the conversion of the existing coach house, which was shown in the previous photographs, into 2 dwellings. It currently forms 1 dwelling, and 35% of those houses would provide affordable housing. The scheme also includes a doctor's surgery and office building at the point of the cursor, which is the red, which hopefully everyone can see, a cafe, which is at the edge of the country park in this location, as well as a 10-hectare, what referred to as a SANG, suitable alternative natural green space. It's approximately 10 hectares, just under. The scheme also includes a number of multi-user public rights of way, off-site highway improvements, the demolition of existing agricultural buildings at both Westridge Farm and Westridge Cross Dairy off Bullen Road, and access to the site would be gained from 3 points for vehicle traffic, from Apley Road at the top, Hope Road or Lime Tree Close, which members walked down, councillors we walked down on Friday, and off Bullen Road. There would also be as well as the footpaths already discussed, there would also be a multi-user link onto Bullen Road at the point of the cursor. This is another plan effectively showing the same as the previous slide, but in plan form opposed to a visual coloured copy. What I will now, before I move through the phases and provide a little more detail, I just wanted to incorporate this plan because I thought it was quite a useful thing for councillors to see if they haven't already seen it as part of the application documents. This is effectively an urban grain plan that shows the density of the proposed development in relation to the density of the surrounding settlement, as well as its relationship in terms of the progression of development in that area. From a perspective of officers, what we have discussed in the report, and I wish to incorporate this to demonstrate, is that the proposed development does not come significantly further south than the existing form of development, east to the existing buildings in this location and dwellings at this point, or indeed north or west of that existing settlement form, effectively. So the development is effectively what you see here in the area of the cursor. Running up along there. For locational councillors, you can't quite position yourself as this at the point of the cursor is the True Cast factory that we looked at on site. So the site runs down through here. What I will now do is run through each phase very, very briefly to give councillors a better indication of the dwelling density and the layout within each phase. This being the phasing plan, councillors will note that the report and the conditions indicate that this phasing plan isn't set. There is a recommended condition that would require a phasing plan, both in relation to the dwellings, the SANG, and the highway works to be submitted as part of the conditions so that we can ensure that it flows, as it were. As I said, I will just run through very, very quickly some plans and some elevations of some of the proposed units within these areas. This being phase A, this would include 50 residential properties, the doctor's surgery at the point of the cursor, which is adjacent to the Truecast factory, as we looked on site. Councillors will note, and we discussed it on site, that there is hatching over the parking spaces in this area. I do have plans of that later in the report, but what that indicates is gazebos over the proposed parking areas, which would provide solar panels to ensure that there was electric charging points for any cars that were to park there. Either side of the proposed commercial building would be public open space within this area of the site. We then have some street scenes of that area. The site plan shows where those street scenes are cut through. So one in the blue, I'm not sure if councillors can pick out that blue line, but one showing the street scene along the Apley Road frontage, which would obviously be amended to the current, and then through the proposed spine road down to the site. Just for placement, the red line that members see on this bottom image is actually where you cut it to create a whole street scene between the two images on top of each other there. So these units effectively representing these units here. What councillors will note, and we discussed on site, is that the design and character and materials of the proposed properties is very similar to that, and the same as, in fact, that of phase 1, the Hope Road development, and that would be continue through. Officers consider that to be an appropriate character for the area, taking the materials in terms of the brick finish of those properties as you move through. These being some visual representations of those in CGI form, but councillors, you saw them on site on Friday for yourselves. This being a elevational treatment of the proposed doctor's surgery, shown in green on the plan at the side. and the internal layout, which would be the provision of offices at first floor level and consulting rooms at the ground floor level. This showing the other elevations in the roof plan. Councillors will note the tower feature, which has been incorporated to take consideration of the tower feature at the Apley Manor Hotel, which is effectively off Apley Road, almost directly opposite the Apley Road entrance, or proposed Apley Road entrance. We then move through to phase B, which would incorporate 73 units and the existing farmhouse. For members can get their bearings, this being the existing farmhouse on site. These being, again, some images showing the proposed street scene running at the point of the cursor and the nature and type of properties and designs proposed for that area. Moving through to the next phase, being phase C, you would see around 57 units, or you would see 57 units and the proposed cafe building at the bottom of the screen here. Again, members will note the gazebo, solar panel parking spaces for that solar charging. And again, some street scenes showing the design concept for that area. And then the elevational and floor plans for the proposed cafe at the edge of the proposed sang. The cafe would also incorporate toilets, as referred to in the report. Moving through to phase D, which would see 44 units, phase E, which would see 30 units, phase F, which would see 77 units. One thing I wanted to point out to councillors was this area at the point of the cursor, which was, councillors will note there's been a slight change in the description of the application where we lose 2 units within the development. That is where the 2 units have been removed because it was considered they were simply too close to some of the trees in respect of potential shading implications on the resultant residents. So those units were removed. And then some, again, street scenes for that phase. What this phase also incorporates or shows is the link to Marlborough Road running along here, and the proposed allotment extension. That extension would be an area of approximately 1425 square metres, which, depending on the size of the allotments, because I have discovered that you can have multiple different sized allotments, would create between either 4 to 8 allotments to add to the existing provision in that area. I've incorporated this plan because I thought it might be useful for members to note where we've talked about the Marlborough Road link. The red dots on this plan show the existing bus routes and the existing bus stops. So the Marlborough Road link has been incorporated within the development to provide better direct access to the bus stops on Marlborough Road. But there are also, which we'll get to, existing bus stops on Apley Road, to which the application proposes improvements to the bus stops to which those buses currently serve. This just providing members with a plan to show the proposed configuration of 125 Marlborough Road once the garage is removed, it being relocated here, and then the proposed multi-user route that would run through there. Then moving through to phase G, which would be 66 units, as well as members will note the kind of green hue to the boundary of this site at the point of the cursor and all the way along that boundary, which shows the proposed 5-metre buffer area, both in terms of ecological enhancements, but also providing, is referred to in the report, to provide that buffer between the existing residential properties on Bullen Road and the proposed units. It should also be noted that these proposed units would all be bungalows, as they sit along the boundary of the site. The coach house to which the application refers a number of times is in the point of the cursor, and this being the proposed access point off Bullen Road. And again, some images to confirm that those units would be bungalows within that proposed street scene on that boundary. Just running through some existing floor plans and elevations for the coach house. And then again, the proposed floor plans for the coach house, seeing it now as 2 units opposed to the 1, and the elevation treatments to result in that layout. We then move through to phase H, which provides 37 units, again a 5-metre buffer on the boundary for both ecology purposes and to provide that separation to the existing residential properties. And those units along that boundary would once again be proposed as bungalows. Finally, phase J, councillors will note there is no phase I for clarity purposes. Also, apologies, that is the elevational street scene for phase H. Finally, we're looking at phase J, which is the proposed 39 units. As already discussed, the application would also incorporate approximately 10-hectare sang on the edge of the site between the end of the development and Cowport Road, which provide multiple different areas in which to encourage recreation within this space and walks. Some visual representations of that sang in terms of both the bottom showing the proposed cross-section and then the upper images showing in more detail what's referred to as the kind of features around the trees and the facilities that would be available within that space. As just very, very quickly, just showing some of the proposed bin stores and cycle stores on site, as well as the proposed garages that sit within the site. This image referred to earlier is the proposed gazebo features over the, or carports, I should probably call them, over the parking spaces for both the cafe and the commercial building, which, as shown, would provide solar panels for electric charging points. The plan on screen at the moment showing the proposed works to the access onto Aptley Road, or to create the access onto Aptley Road, as well as the improvement works associated with that side of the development. Those incorporate the links to the cycle track, links to the onward connectivity from the site for the cycle routes, the proposed zebra crossing, and bus stop enhancements to provide for and encourage the use of buses to and from the site. This being the plan showing the proposed highway junction from the site onto Bullen Road, proposed footpath links that we observed on site on Friday, and the entrance through. We also discussed on Friday, but it's shown in here as we looked at it then, is the proposed pinch point and a vehicle priority point at the point of the cursor. There would also be proposed a zebra crossing onto Marlborough Road. So as you come from the multi-user route, I should say, past what is the existing garage onto Marlborough Road, there would be the provision of a zebra crossing just up from that. I thought members may find this image useful, which shows the report talks a lot about the pasture land 2 landscape character area. So I've incorporated this image to just indicate to members the proportion of the site that would remove that pasture landscape from that kind of landscape character area, or I should say local landscape character area. So members will note the area of PL2 on this plan and the proportion of the site that would then remove that landscape character area from that area. I've incorporated this plan and the following ones from the submitted visual impact assessment. I've incorporated these because the report does spend a lot of time discussing the receptor groups and the viewpoints within the impact of the character of the area section. I will whiz through these, but what I wanted members to see was first this plan, which shows not only where those viewpoints are taken from, that are referred to in the report and listed, but also the what we call the zones of visual influence, or the theoretical zones of visual influence. So the purple that members can see is the areas to which the site could be visible. So when taking into account topography, buildings, everything else, that's what could be visible, up to an area of 3 kilometres. Obviously, as you get further away, as indicated in the report, in the assessment of the visual impact of the development, as you move further away from the site, actually in terms of what the human eye can see in relation to the surrounding area and the development around it, depletes. But the following images just take you through each viewpoint and show the existing vista from that viewpoint and the visual representation of the application. Obviously, what this doesn't do is superimpose the development into those views, but members will note that the report goes into a lot of detail in relation to each of the views where there is considered to be a potential effect. And I thought it may just be useful for members to have a view of those vistas on the slides. Obviously, I understand a number of you will have looked at these anyway, but flicking through those viewpoints in relation to that section of the report, which references the landscape visual impact of the proposed development. The viewpoints as shown on these slides can be cross-referenced against the report in relation to the viewpoints that can be seen. And as the report states, and as members will see from the images, the further away from the site you come, as you get to kind of 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14 as we go round, the actual ability to see the site depletes significantly in relation to those vistas. And then just finally, we have viewpoint 14, which is actually taken from Ryde Pier looking across, which, as members would expect, at that point, the human eye cannot really make out the development in terms of the existing built context of Ryde. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Right, we'll now move on to public speaking. And we will commence with Mr. Mark Gaskin, who is... All right, okay, thank you, sorry. We're going to start with Amy Holliday, who will speak for a maximum of 2 minutes. Whenever you start.
I'm Amy Holliday and Westridge Farm is my home. My husband Nigel and father-in-law Bernard are the tenant farmers. Together they know Westridge Farm better than anyone, having maintained and worked this land for 55 years. To be clear, Nigel and Bernard wish to keep farming at Westridge Farm. They have not been given notice or agreed a deal to surrender their tenancy. Without planning permission, they have the legal right to farm this land for the next 2 generations. Therefore, Westridge Farm does not have vacant possession and affects the deliverability of this planning application. My family's human rights is a material consideration and cannot be ignored. The approval of this planning application will cause major interference to us as a family with dramatic impact. We will lose our home and livelihood and we will be left with very little to rebuild our lives. Westridge Farm is not the only site on the island that can be developed to deliver these 473 houses. Therefore, this cannot be compared against our home and livelihood. The agricultural land value that will be lost has not been fairly evaluated. The reality is that the approval of this application would mean the closure of Westridge Farm forever. This totals over 50 hectares. There are just 9 dairy farms left on the island. The total holding of Westridge Farm, including the land that is not within the development, must be considered, as that is a total farmland that will be lost. COVID-19 has shown the importance of farmers and local produce, with communities more aware of buying local. With a secure future away from development, we plan to process our own milk, giving the community access to farm produce, which will reduce food miles and is more environmentally sustainable. The application focuses on access to the Sang, but our future plans as a community farm allows increased community access to the rural landscape and lifestyle at Westridge Farm, benefiting the well-being of the community, ensuring no impact to the natural environment. Today, I ask you all to refuse this application. Farming is an investment in the soil and the landscape. You must safeguard Westridge Farm for the benefit of future generations to come.
Thank you, Ms. Holliday. And next will be Mr. Mark Gaskin on behalf of Joe Rees and Kenneth and Stone. And you have up to 4 minutes, Mr. Gaskin.
Councillors, that silence that you've just heard is the sound of the natural environment covered in concrete and tarmac, which is what we're talking about here. Councillors, the island is at a turning point. As with climate change, it now needs a better environmentally friendly future, not repeating mistakes of past administrations. The Save Westridge Farm petition has over 5,000 signatures. That's more than voted for you in May to elect all but one of you as councillors. Save Westridge Farm Facebook now has a huge post reach. In an online survey of over 750 contributions, over 90% from islanders, 98% wanted to see Westridge Farm saved as a community farm. The first community farm in the UK in 2006 now has more than 25 employees and continues to grow. It attracts visitors, provides for the community in well-being, local food, life experience, environment protection and education. Westridge Farm is exceptionally well placed to be as successful. Westridge Farm, as you've heard, is the last working dairy farm in East Wight, one of only 9 left on the island. This planning office report and the introduction tonight is so selective in its content. You'd be forgiven for questioning what its purpose is. You've heard a lot about ecological enhancement, when really what we're talking about is the destruction of a working farm and destruction of DEFRA parkland and Grade 2 agricultural land. And what are we going to be given? A few allotments, a few little green spaces here and there? It's no substitute. Last year, the government's Affordable Housing Commission report stated, and I quote, "We have emphasised the problem of social rents being replaced by affordable rent, the latter being unaffordable in so many cases. While a household earning around the national living wage in social housing is paying around 25% of their income on rent, the figure is in excess of 40% for an affordable rent home." In conclusion, the report states, and the Commission states, the Commission recommends the ending of the affordable rent product. Councillors, the applicant is required to be capable of delivering the development, and they're far from community-minded. Recently, building and electrical contractors have recently walked off the site because of non-payment. Unsupported part-built houses will need to be pulled down. The director's walked out. The company is not submitting full accounts to Companies House. They've got virtually declared zero assets. Something you've not been showing in your something that you have not been shown in your site visit as well. There has been recent video and photo evidence of building site surface runoff and the surface runoff from the roads from the site being run into a natural brook. A complaint with evidence is to be submitted to the Environment Agency. A formal complaint was submitted to the Isle of Wight Council in May re breach of planning for the pumping station access road not being from Bullen Road as granted, but instead being built on greenfield rented by the farmers. The pumping station has not been built as indicated. A massive 2.4 diameter, 10-metre long septic tank has also been placed in the ground next to the station. The existing site is only connected to the main sewer by a tiny pipe of about that diameter. Entrance to the proposed Hope Road site. Conditions put in place by the past committee for the safety of pedestrians have been sidestepped by the developers and the planning office. One of the two payments for pedestrian access from Hope Road is... Gary, is that
Thank you,
3
Mr.
minutes
Gaskin.
or 4?
No, I'm going to leave it there, Mr. Gaskin. Thank you. The next public speaker from Ryde Town Council is Councillor Simon Cook. You have a maximum of 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Ryde Town Council has previously lodged objections to this application following extensive public consultation, which showed residents to be overwhelmingly against. We remain firmly opposed to the proposed development for the reasons previously given, but would like to take this opportunity to expand on our concerns. I would first like to make the point that we believe this application should be refused outright, but is contrary to sections 11 and 14 of the NPPF, which should recognise that there is an emerging island plan. This, along with Ryde's place plan and position statement, clearly states that if existing quotas have already been met, then any additional proposals will result in overdevelopment. The position and scale of this application constitutes a serious threat to the historic settlement of Elmfield Village and to Ryde Town itself. The creation of Westacre Park would lead to a competing community with its own identity, as there is no defined plan to integrate with Elmfield. This will have a negative effect on community cohesion, contrary to paragraph 130 of the NPPF. We are also extremely concerned that this site is outside of the designated settlement boundary as defined in the Island Plan Core Strategy, contrary to policy SP1, and that it significantly increases the risk of settlement coalescence with Nettleston and Seaview. The application erodes the historic and natural environment between Ryde Town and the parishes of Nettleston and Seaview, which is contrary to policy AAP2. We believe that there are serious problems regarding the effects that this development would have on the surrounding highways network. The recently revised report from Island Roads is stated in the planning officer's report to conclude recommended conditional approval, but it must be noted that this is not explicitly stated in their substantial 28-page report. Indeed, it is so full of conditions, caveats and warnings that it does nothing but cause concern. For example, Island Roads question the deliverability of works required at Westridge Quash, which are essential to mitigate the large increase in traffic flows. They also highlight the existing geometric shortcomings of these junctions. Furthermore, they refer to the proposed cycle access and egress arrangements at the Bullen Road site access as substandard. They summarise the relevant section as follows. As a result, it is anticipated that this application will increase the potential for traffic accidents on these parts of the highway network, and in the absence of any identified mitigation measures, the proposal is contrary to policies DM2 and SP7 of the Island Core Plan strategy. Ryde Town Council also objects to the proposed revisions to the site access at Marble Road, as it will compromise both the street scene and the access to Salisbury Road. The increased traffic flows onto one of the main routes into Ryde will undoubtedly have a detrimental effect on the local amenity. We also question the suitability of the access point on Aptley Road. There is a huge question mark over the deliverability of the extensive remodelling required, given that it involves demolishing walls and removing trees. There may be orders, covenants or other restrictions that make this unfeasible from the outset, but that is not addressed in this report. Indeed, we feel that proposed location of this site is not supported by adequate road infrastructure generally and takes no account of the impact of a major increase in vehicle movements in and out of development, or indeed on the surrounding area and wider town. Ryde Town Council also objects on the principle that this serves no housing need in Ryde, as there are currently 1,400 houses with full or outline planning permission. This already fulfils the quota for Ryde, so clearly approval would lead to a serious case of overdevelopment. We are also concerned with the lack of public transport provision, which would result in discrimination against older adults, children, non-drivers, or those with disabilities. The development will demolish the last farm in Ryde and one of the island's remaining 9 dairy farms. Westridge Farm has been at the centre of Elmfield village life for generations, and its loss will be a devastating blow for the area and indeed the wider island. I grew up in Elmfield, on Hope Road, at the bottom of which lies the farm. So I know personally how important Westridge Farm was and continues to be for the village, as we call it. I remember how pleased my father was to receive his regular load of manure, and have fond memories of him extolling its virtues as he wheelbarrowed it to the back garden. The farm also hosted social events such as Bonfire Night, which were always very popular and vital in fostering community bonds. Ryde Town Council recently voted overwhelmingly in favour of supporting Westridge Farm and its desire to become a community farm, and to apply to the Isle of Wight Council for it to be listed as an asset of community value. With the loss of Branston Farm, there is a real educational need that such a community farm would satisfy. It would also provide very significant green space to the public. Now more than ever, the production of local food is of vital importance, and we should be doing everything we can to not only protect it, but help it to thrive and grow. You have before you a contentious application which, if approved, would negatively impact Ryde, irrevocably damage communities, demolish the last farm in the town, and cause significant loss of green fields, of which Ryde has precious few left. The application will provide the wrong type of housing in the wrong location, along with a significant increase in traffic, which would overburden our already inadequate roads. There is widespread community opposition from town and parish councils, residents' associations, heritage groups and environmental groups. The Island's MP, Bob Seeley, has also voiced his strong opposition. Ryde Town Council calls on this planning committee to properly weigh all these considerations for the good of the island, Ryde and its residents, and refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Coates. Next, we have the agent for the applicant, Mr. David Long. Mr. Long, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Just disbarring Mr. Gaskin's comment about the applicant, the financial status, etc., etc. I have no idea where he's got that information, but all I can say is it's far from truthful. But disbarring that, the most important test for you members today as decision maker that underpins everything in the decision-making process is Section 11 of the NPPF Part D. What does that tell us? It tells us the presumption in favour of development and to grant consent unless. And unless is a subject that I'll come on to in a second. But what do we know today? Town Council go on about unaffordable properties. What the properties are being built today under shared equity, 2-bed coach house, £105,000, 2-bed house, £116,000, a 3-bed house, £147,000, assisted as well with Help to Buy. Members, they're affordable properties for islanders. The proposal has a low proportion of 4-bedroom properties, We've got 68 one-bedroom homes, the majority of which are houses, a product not built on the island for several decades. We've got properties for the elderly in bungalows. We've got 3-bedroom properties that can easily be expanded internally so they can move upwards in the chain. We've got 166 affordable houses that are blind in their design, high quality design that you saw on site on Friday. Fabric first approach, well insulated, energy efficient designs, broadband connected in from day one with EV charging points for cars. We've got 1,400 linear meters off-site improvements to improve cycling and infrastructure. According to your local cycling and infrastructure delivery plan, that would actually save the council £740,000 compared to what you were going to do. This is what the project will deliver. We have 16 hectares of open space, 2,500 trees within the Sang, 800 street trees, over 1,700 linear meters of new hedgerow network, 17% ecological net gain, and that excludes bat boxes, bird boxes, dormice tubes, bat lofts, the meadow grassland, the swales, the detention basins for invertebrates. The list goes on and on. We have a construction contract worth £100 million. And so the policy test laid before members is approve consent unless, and it accepts impacts, unless there is a significant impact that demonstrably outweighs the benefit. Again, significant impact that outweighs the benefit. In the report, there's no significant impact.
Thank you, Mr. Tom. The next speaker is the applicant, Mr. Ian Delaney. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Delaney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ian Delaney and I'm CEO of Captiva Homes. We're a local business with nearly 20 years experience on the island. Importantly, we have a track record of 100% delivery of our planning applications. We're a Homes England investment partner, which means our financial and technical capacity has been independently verified and assessed. But most importantly, we're islanders, and we recognise and embrace the weight of responsibility that comes with development on our beautiful home. When we began planning Westacre Park, we did so with the goal of setting a new benchmark for housing on the island. We researched and visited many developments, some good, some not, and we've applied best practice for those learnings. In the interest of time, I'll highlight just 2 of Westacre's key benefits. Firstly, the creation of the 10-hectare park. This will include 2,500 new trees, a cafe, play area, public toilets, a network of cycle and footpaths to create usable open space that will benefit new and existing Ryde residents. It recognises the importance of such spaces for mental health, physical exercise and community use. It also helps deliver a 17% biodiversity net gain from this development, well above the proposed future target of 10%. Secondly, the plan includes provision of a doctor's surgery. This was one of the most requested features at our extensive public consultations. When assessing this application, you have the benefit of being able to see how phase 1 is already being delivered, which means we can deal with facts, not fiction. 80% of sales to islanders, 50% of whom are Ryde residents. Nearly 50% of purchases have needed government help to buy funding. 100% of shared ownership homes sold out, all to islanders. No sales of second homes. Investment of 16 million, creation of 80 island jobs, including 10 apprenticeships. A positive planning decision today will provide continuity of delivery at Westacre Park. We're already on the adjacent site and we will be able to maintain construction. It will protect the existing 80 jobs at site and create many more. It will unlock £100 million of additional investment into the local economy, boosting the island's COVID recovery. But most importantly, it will deliver 473 desperately needed island homes, 166 of which will be affordable. These homes are integral to the successful delivery of the new draft island planning strategy. I would also highlight that today you're considering a full planning application, not outline. This is testament to our commitment to delivery. It should give you great confidence and certainty over exactly what will be delivered. It's an application on land that meets the appropriate tests for being deliverable, and is proposed for allocation under the previous and latest draft island planning strategies, a plan signed off by this council's cabinet and scrutiny committees this month. With nearly 2,500 island households on the housing register, double-digit price increases over the last 12 months.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. That's the end. Thank you very much for your contribution. Often at this point we would also have a contribution by the local councillor, which in this case is Councillor Michael Lilly of Ryde, Apley and Enfield. Councillor Lilly has been advised by the monitoring officer not to be present today or to make representations virtually due to the potential risk of prejudicing the decision of this committee. Therefore, he has sent in a written representation document, which I've asked Mr. Bolter, the strategic manager, if he will commence to read. Thank you, Ollie.
I believe this application is weighted unfairly towards a recommendation of conditional approval. You, as members of this committee, are the decision makers tonight, and you, as elected councillors like myself, can come to a decision that differs from this recommendation. You simply rebalance the weight of policies and material considerations to reach a different decision, which I believe should be refusal in this case. Looking at the considerations the officer mentioned, I wish to highlight the ones that should be weighted towards refusal. 1. Human rights. The officers conclude that interference with human rights is unnecessary as it's in the public interest. This is ridiculous. Interference isn't necessary when alternative sites are available. The council will be making a local family homeless, revoking a man's livelihood, property and confiscating a child's future. Sheer common sense and rationality dictates that human rights issues are absolutely central to this. There are over 1,400 plus new housing with outline or full already in Ryde, such as Pennyfeathers, Rosemary Vineyard, Harcourt Sands and new brownfield sites are becoming available. This is overdevelopment as only 1,300 to 1,400 new homes are allocated to Ryde. The courts have actually said that the loss of one's home is a most extreme form of interference with the right to respect for the home. It was actually at the officer's request that I take independent legal advice on this point, and the MPPF itself actually states that for land to be appropriate for development, it must be available now and not attached to a local family's basic human rights. The site is not deliverable. The applicants offer no mitigation whatsoever for interfering with human rights in this regards, and this infringes not only Human Rights Act 1998, but the Isle of Wight Council's own constitution. If you approve this application, you are denying island residents their human right and breaking the Isle of Wight Council Constitution, November 2019, version 8.7, principles of decision making. The council, its members and its officers will have a respect for human rights. Rule 2.1.99, page 175. 2. Deficiencies. Saying there's a short field of brownfield sites alone is no justification to develop on this particular site. No proof that effective use of brownfield land has been offered up, and substantial weight should be given to that fact. Para 119 and 120 MPPF. The new Island Planning Strategy, IPS Regulation 18, which is in draft form and which is being internally circulated within the council, recognises that more brownfield sites will become available, and the predominance of 3-bedroom houses at Westacre does not fit that focus which the Island Core Plan 2012 has on first-time buyers or the need for housing needs to be for island residents. The applicants haven't submitted an evacuation plan, Para 4.104, as per requirements of the new draft island plan, managing flood risks, EV14, and they don't include provision to install community district heating systems. That's potentially contrary to the Island Core Plan Strategy, Para 5.71, and the draft new Island Plan C10. The tenant farmers note that no site visits were made by the applicant, so it's confusing how the data was compiled for their biodiversity report. An absence of any given species shouldn't be assumed until sufficient evidence is furnished, considering the island's golden status on UNESCO biosphere and commitment to climate emergency. The environmental husbandry of the tenant farmer has meant that there are significant numbers of important and endangered species such as dormice, red squirrels and kestrels. The application can be refused in relation to sections 11 and 14 of the National Policy Framework if underdeveloped land has a viable other use in protecting the natural habitat, food production, and provides strong mitigation in regard to climate emergency, especially being close to 5 protected areas of special importance. A sustainable grass-fed dairy that feeds in the IW dairy farming industry that protects natural habitat fits these sections. 3. Impact on character area. Remember at all times, the site's fields are of medieval date identified in the HER and historic landscape characterisation. The archaeology officer reports the overall impact of the development on these HLC polygons will be significant, and that this involves the destruction of one of the last working historic dairy farms on the island. The barn is an 18th century depicted on historic maps, and the farmstead predates this. This is the last working farm in Ryde and last dairy farm in East Wight, and last of 10 on IW. In mitigation, the applicant offers the SANG. The SANG guidelines state that sites of high nature conservation value should be avoided because increased visitor numbers cause disturbance, erosion, input of nutrients from dog feces, and incidents of fires. The SANG doesn't offer up an equivalent or better alternative as required by para 99 of MPPF because it is neither natural nor historic. The Island Core Plan 2012 recognises the island for being a special place with its stunning landscapes having significant nature conservation interest, and it's this factor why people come to visit, resulting in a tourism industry turning over £500 million per annum for our economy and employment, thus protecting its aims at SP4 and SP3. The officer's condition of recording the site before demolition offers no mitigation whatsoever. The farm is needed for tourist and community well-being as a community farm reinforces the aims of New Island Plan of Community C7, education provisions C9, and providing social and community infrastructure C14 by providing educational access in a controlled and responsible-like manner, and it supports the aim of DM8 as it presents economic development.
Okay, thank you. Ollie, I'll have to stop you there. Right, we've had all the public comments. I'm now going to go back to Ms. Wilkinson for anything she'd like to respond to. Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't intend to respond to much of what was said. I consider that the officer report covers the majority of elements that were raised, unless members have any specific questions about any of the points, and then I will answer those questions. The only things I wanted to clarify was a couple of points. One in relation to some comments made by third parties related to elements of enforcement in terms of current development that's being undertaken. I would just highlight to councillors that that's ultimately irrelevant to your considerations of this application. If there is a breach of enforcement or a breach where the Environment Agency need to be informed or other anything such as that, there is processes to which we would look to assess that and see whether there is a breach has occurred, and there are processes to go through. It's not relevant to the material considerations of the application in front of members tonight. Councillors, apologies. The other point I just wanted to raise was a point of correction or clarification, which I may need to bring Alan White in on, was that it is my understanding that certainly in relation to the update paper members have in front of them in relation to Cycle White and their support of the application, that Island Roads do not, as suggested, consider the application would result in dangers to pedestrians or cyclists entering the network. Revised plans have been submitted to overcome all previous objections in that regard. So Mr. White is nodding to me, so I'm comfortable that I can confirm that. So I'm unsure where the comment came from that relates to concerns in relation to pedestrian safety onto the network from the proposed scheme. The scheme has been amended, and that comment was removed, that concern was removed in Island Road's latest comments. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson. Okay, just Sarah referred to the update paper that you all had just ahead of the meeting. Last week, the government decided to introduce some revisions to the National Planning Policy Framework, and Ms. Wilkinson has updated the references within her report regarding that framework. There's also other representations that have been made right up until lunchtime today where she's responded to them. She also refers to the Cycle White one there. I did urge you all to appear well before the meeting to read that. Has everybody had the opportunity to read it? Nobody needs some time to read it? Okay, thank you very much. Right then, councillors, you've had the presentation, you've heard all the public speaking, so I'm now going to open up discussion on the application, with eventually the intention of moving to some determination. But I won't expect that too early. If you have any questions first of the planning staff, you know, I think we'll probably deal with those first. So can we kick off with questions? Councillor Brading, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. I have three questions really, all sort of linked to road access and road safety, if I can. Firstly, at the Apley Road end, you mentioned enhancements to the bus stop. I'd like to know a bit more detail about what that means. At the other end, you mentioned the Bullen Road access. There'll be pinch points and a small pavement put in. Was consideration given to a zebra crossing at that side of the development as well? And finally, it's mentioned about alterations to the Westridge Cross junction and system, which is a nightmare at the best of times, the traffic lights. I'd like to know what the enhancements to the Westridge Cross junction is going to be as well, please. Thank you.
Collection of questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'm going to ask if Mr. White is able to respond to points 1 and 2 in relation to the Apley Road and Bullen Road, and then myself and possibly Ms. Botter will come back on the latter point.
Yes, Mr. White.
Thank you, Chair. If I start off with the the Apley Road end of the site, the footway and cycleway provision there. The proposal includes for a new priority junction onto Apley Road, and coming from the eastern approach, so coming from Seaview, it includes for an element of footway and cycle access, so cyclists approaching from Seaview can enter a shared use route that runs around the radii of the priority junction into the site. Then to the west, the junction includes for a shared use footway cycle route that comes up through the Spine Road. It runs round towards Ryde Town Centre direction. It includes for footway cycle link and a zebra crossing on Apley Road. And then either side of Apley Road, where there are existing bus stops, the actual bus stops themselves would be enhanced with shelters, a new footway provision, and provision of associated footway linkage there, which is currently absent on the northern side of the road at present. In respect to the Bullen Road access proposals, similar to Apley Road, it includes for a simple priority junction. It also includes for a build out and a priority flow system, which locally narrows the carriageway down to single carriageway working. On either side of the road, there would be, on the site side of the road, so on the northern side of Bullen Road, there would be a footway cycleway, which would have continued down through the Spine Road of the site. That then comes to the build out on Bullen Road. And then there's provision for an uncontrolled crossing facility to continue through, is it the copse that takes you through to Westridge. There would be a footway that runs from that crossing provision on the southern side of Bullen Road that then links back through to Westridge Cross. But there is no provision for a controlled crossing facility on that part of the road network, as it was felt that due to existing vehicle flows and potential vehicle flows, it wasn't deemed a requirement at that location as part of the development.
Thank you, Chairman. In relation to the Westridge Cross elements that you asked, the application itself doesn't propose any physical works to Westridge Cross. It proposes to contribute towards enhancements to those crossroads as part of a kind of combination of contributions from multiple developments within the area of the site. The same approach was taken for the recently approved Nicholson Road development, where that scheme would also contribute towards enhancements to that junction. The enhancements would include effectively a widening of 2 arms of that junction to mean that they can take full capacity. The councillors will know when driving down there at the moment, although there may be 2 lanes, they are narrower than standard. The enhancements would allow for a widening of that road at those points to allow for an improved a compliant lane width, both coming onto the junction from Great Preston Road and coming on from down to join it, if that makes sense, hopefully. Councillor Brady.
Councillor Quirk, Chris.
Thank you. I too have 3 questions. The first one relates to the human rights issue. Has any guidance in regards to planning been issued by the government, or are there any appeal decisions or case law cases that give us any guidance in that regard? The second one, is this site currently still in the SLAR and in the numbers included in the island plan and the draft island plan as it stands today? And the third one is the road going through the site gives the opportunity to create a rat run. Has any consideration been given to some sort of traffic calming measure to stop it being a shortcut through the site?
So,
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, I will look to answer all 3 of those, and Mr. Gard may wish to come in if he's unhappy with any of my responses. In terms of the human rights issue or element, from our advice, and there is obviously a detailed section on this in the report, is that human rights is a material consideration. There is various case law comments, elements like that in relation to human rights and planning. Ultimately, no situation is the same. There are different circumstances in each case, but in each case, ultimately, the conclusion is it's a material consideration that you must balance with all the others in terms of the acceptability of the scheme. Once I've answered your other questions, Mr. Gard may wish to come in with anything further, but that's kind of the basics in relation to that issue, over and above what it says in the report. In terms of the second question, yes, the site is still in the SLAR, which, for those who aren't aware, is the Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment, and it is an proposed allocation within the draft island planning strategy. So it is within the numbers of that strategy, as you've asked. In relation to the issue of rat run, this is an interesting one, I think, in terms of a question and an answer, in that no detailed consideration has been given to specific mechanisms in place to restrict people doing it. So any speed humps, anything like that. The road has been designed to accommodate a kind of safe movement. I suppose my second element is there is I suppose by the very name of it, rat run, there is a negative connotation associated with that. I suppose I would push the point for members back to consider, actually, should the site accommodate some of the development, some of the traffic currently travelling down Marlborough Road? Is that a negative? So it is possible that some people through the development will disperse on multiple routes in the existing network, and some people utilising the existing network will disperse through the site if they wish to, if they consider that to be an alternative option as a route. That can sometimes be a positive to the highway network because it can simply spread the existing level of traffic on that network. So no, there is no proposal to resist rat running, should we say, in terms of the design of the roads, because it's not necessarily a negative in this instance.
I think that probably depends whether you're a local resident with young children or the driver of a car. But but thank you very much.
Point noted. Mr. Gard, have you got anything to add on the human rights issue?
Thank you, Chairman. Notice to point members to paragraph 6.21 to 6.28 of the report material. The planning staff have considered human rights. And it is a material planning consideration. Human rights are a material planning consideration. They've taken it into account in forming their recommendation to you, and it is entirely. I have to urge you to have regard to that as a material planning consideration, because you must have regard to all material planning considerations in reaching your decision. The weight to be attached to all material planning considerations is entirely a matter for councillors of this committee. And I've nothing further to add. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Are there any other questions? Councillor Jarman, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few, if I may. If I can refer to section 6.13, first of all. Two-thirds of the way down the paragraph, it notes that the scheme includes provision for space for a doctor's surgery should it be required. Does that imply that it's going to be built or not built, or on what basis will that decision be made? The second question I have is regarding 6.146, where there are some concerns raised about access for buses and other vehicles. I'm involved with a group called the Fit Bus in the West Wight, which most people will be familiar with, which assists people with mobility transport, particularly elderly people. And I wonder what concerns there were or what provision was provided for access for mobility vehicles, which can indeed be impeded by on-street parking. The third one is about sustainability under, I suppose, capacity assessment for the utilities, which I understand has not been conducted. We are relying on Southern Water and others meeting statutory obligations. And my concern there, which I'd like you to reflect on, is that in the last 2 weeks we've had 3, which I believe are 1 in 30-year events in terms of flooding on the island. And I know there are a number of concerns raised here, which have been echoed in some of the comments. And the final one really is regard to the period. It notes that the start is to be initiated within 3 years, but doesn't provide a date by which it is completed. And I know that many people are often concerned with these events dragging on for a great deal of time, and I'm sure it would provide some restitution of that issue if there were a period by which it was to be completed, which I could not find. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll take each of them in turn. In terms of the space for a doctor's surgery, yes, in essence, it is just the space for a doctor's surgery. There is no GP on board at this time. Ultimately, that is a decision of the trust, effectively. What the application does is, in response to the comments from the public consultation process, in which it was indicated that there was a desire for a surgery, that space has been provided. But yes, I can confirm it's solely the space that would be available should a doctor's surgery wish to occupy it. There is, and my understanding is, there is a need for the relocation of 3 existing surgeries within the Ryde area. And therefore the scheme provides a building with which they may wish to relocate. There is a desire for the trust to do that, is my understanding. In terms of the second question in relation to the Fit Bus adaptations of on-street parking, the road is wide. Roads are wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass. There are no points where it narrows to that extent. Therefore, there is not a situation where on-road parking, if done in kind of safely and in accordance with the law effectively, would cause a significant problem to a bus. If a situation occurred where during the development there was a point in which there was a problem with on-road parking, then the developer, the council, all parties could look at whether it's necessary to implement a TRO in order to restrict on-road parking. However, the development does propose a higher level of parking than potentially you would normally expect to see, because it also incorporates a number of car parks, which is in essence, as well as to provide parking for the residents, there is also visitor parking to ensure that, to discourage on-road parking. It generally occurs in situations where there's insufficient parking in an area. So the development has provided its required and slightly above its required parking provision to ensure that there's a deterrent to on-road parking. In terms of the suitability and capacity of the networks and statutory undertakers, ultimately it is the responsibility of the statutory undertakers to legally provide capacity for I think in this instance you're referring to foul. disposal from the site. It is their legal requirement, and therefore that is a matter between the developer and the statutory undertaker. The developer has confirmed that they would be utilising the existing mains drainage system, and that is effectively the information we need to determine whether there is acceptable foul discharge. And that's that one. In terms of no completion date, no, there is not a completion date. You legally cannot require a developer to complete a development by a particular time. They legally have to start it within a period, but you cannot legally require them to complete it through a planning condition.
Councillor Oliver Martin.
Thank you, Chair. This follows on from Chris's last question as well. On the tenants' rights as well, with these, apparently there's a restriction on the tenancy, which means the landlord is only legally able to remove up to 20 acres in any 1 year. Is that why we've got a sort of 3-year start date on it, so they can actually get those 3 years and get, or is that why we've got sort of 9 lots in the building plan?
Thank you, Chairman. No, it's a simple answer to that. Any restrictive tenancy or covenant, and actually earlier in the public speaking there was mention in relation to covenants. Any restricted covenants or tenancies sit outside of the planning process. So they sit alongside. Planning doesn't trump anything and nothing trumps planning. So they all run alongside each other. So if there are tenancy requirements or covenants that need to be removed or varied, they would run alongside the consent. The reason we have a 3-year consent is because it's a standard process. You have to give a developer a time limit to commence, and the standard one is 3 years. You can give them longer should you wish, but it's discouraged. You cannot really justify giving them a shorter period unless there's a specific reason for doing so in relation to the nature of the development. We've never done it. In relation to the nature of the phases, that's simply because in general terms you would not be able to build more than 50 units a year. Ballpark, generally 50 units a year. What we would not want to do is have a development that came, or not really wouldn't we want to do in terms of practicality, because you have a development that has a number of units of which you can build around 50 a year. You would not expect the information you submit at year 1 to be identical to the information you submit at year 10 or 5 even, because what you will find is that building regs will slightly change, various elements will slightly change. So in terms of the detailed elements, such as the kind of specific landscaping, the specific materials, if we were to agree all of the materials phase 1 and that company stopped making that brick, it would cause a problem as you went through those years. So what we generally do for a development of this scale is split it into relevant phases. Each phase would then be discharged separately, except for matters where you need to consider it as a whole site, such as drainage, overflow rates, things like that. And then it allows you to then, if, for example, materials is probably the most relevant one, a material becomes unavailable, you can then change the material as you discharge future phases of conditions. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Chair. As the building of the social housing, is that it on par with the building of private houses? Yeah, so we'll go alongside, it won't be left to the end, I'll take it.
Thank you, Chairman. We would agree a phasing plan for the delivery of affordable housing. It absolutely would not be left to the end. You will often find with this nature of development that it generally comes forward in like early on, because that element has can be quite heavily funded and supported in that nature. But we would ensure that it is appropriately phased through the terms of the legal agreement.
Councillor Medland. John.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. I'd like to come back to the MPPF paragraph 11. It's already been alluded to as being quite critical, because it says that the presumption in favour of sustainable development is kind of based on, I quote, all plans should promote a sustainable pattern of development that seeks to meet the development needs of the area, align growth and infrastructure, improve the environment, mitigate climate change, and adapt to its effects. What confuses me about the plans, as I understand them, is that there is no planning for domestic solar energy harvesting. There are no heat pumps being considered for alternative ways of bringing hot water. There's no, well, I'm wondering what my question comes down to really, are we using gas central heating? Because gas central heating, according to the Climate Change Committee, will be phased out of all new developments after 2025, and we're talking a little bit more than that, aren't we? So I'm a bit confused by that. We haven't got basic things like water harvesting, recycling water and reusing it. It seems to be quite rather odd that we're not taking into account this really crucial element of sustainability and climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman, I'm just trying to find, I know there is, and I'm just trying to find it, the section in the report that references those elements. But what I think is important to highlight and note is that the section of the MPPF that Councillor Major you're referring to refers to plan making. So it doesn't refer to decision taking. So paragraph 11 of the MPPF is split into two. First section of it is when plan making, which is the development of the IPS, the development of the core strategy. The second element refers to decision taking. So the kind of quote you've referenced isn't in relation to individual planning applications in terms of that element. It's a broader plan making proposal. However, I understand your point in that, you know, that we are not putting what I would term retrofitted features into the proposals. I can't find the exact paragraph in the report, but I can find it if necessary, or ask someone else to find it for me as I'm answering the rest of the question. But ultimately, the answer to it is that no, the scheme doesn't propose to do that at this time. The proposal seeks to utilise the build quality to achieve the required builder control standards for energy efficiency. And therefore it can do that through appropriate insulation, through appropriate materials, through appropriate build construction. And that is what it seeks to do. Obviously, as we move into the future and building regs becomes a greater burden in terms of that element, then the scheme can adapt to that in order to do that. So if I refer to paragraph 6.214, I think we're on, thank you, which references the proposed, that effectively responds to the comments that third parties raised in relation to the that very point in terms of how it is adapting the climate emergency. And that goes into detail in terms of how it would respond to that, in terms of its waste hierarchy, in relation to the use of kind of bolt-on solutions, as I've called them retrofitted. The paragraph actually refers to them as bolt-on solutions. So hopefully that paragraph will answer your question sufficiently.
Okay. John, do you want to come back?
It just seems more logical to put these things in at the beginning rather than have to retrofit them 5 years later. I can't understand it. Thank you for your answer anyway.
A couple of questions from me. Affordable housing and the grave need for affordable rented housing on the island. I learned on the site visit that the affordable housing there will be managed by a company called Capture Housing. And Capture Housing isn't a registered housing provider. Doesn't have to be under the NPPF, but it did concern me a little bit. Registered housing providers meet certain standards in terms of tenancies, security and service to their tenants. Can you give me any assurances that the housing provided affordably on this development, but that would be managed by Capture Housing, or as a captive housing, but whatever it is, Capture Housing, will provide the level of tenancy service and security enjoyed by tenants of registered housing providers? Can I also have assurances that should this application be approved, that the number of rented affordable housing would be at a much higher percentage level than I understand has happened in the adjacent Lime Tree Close, where the majority of the affordable housing has been equity shared ownership. In my experience, equity shared ownership isn't always that popular, and what we really need is rented affordable housing. If we were to approve this, would we be able to put a condition in that required a minimum percentage of rented affordable housing to be provided? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose I'll answer two questions separately. Obviously, in terms of the affordable housing, the Section 106 agreement would, as kind of drafted, would require the units of affordable housing to simply be provided and managed by an affordable housing provider. It wouldn't stipulate that affordable housing provider. It would simply require it to be a provider of affordable housing and to be agreed with the council ultimately. So there is an ability for us to have control over that, and have done in the past on various sites, including sites which Capture currently provide affordable housing for. However, in terms of the tenancy and level of service, I suppose the reassurance I can provide is that as a standard requirement of our 106 agreements, and Mr. Guard may wish to add to this if needs be, that we require certain things before the affordable housing is kind of accepted. One of those is that they are connected to all services or facilities, that type of the standard. You know, they must have access to the house, they must have electric, they must have all of those things. That's generally a standard practice. We would also require that they are affordable by definition, and we have controls over various different elements of them. And I don't know whether Mr. Gard wants to add anything in terms of the standard clauses for affordable housing within agreements, and can provide some greater assurance in terms of what we would generally seek to incorporate within the agreement to cover that point. I don't know whether you want to cover that before I go on to the affordable housing percentage, Ben.
Mr. Gard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the Section 106 agreement, and this picks up on a point Councillor Oliver raised before. The Section 106 agreement is a mechanism by which planning obligations are secured, and that will enable clauses to be put in there to require the build out of a certain number of affordable housing before before open market dwellings are occupied, and that number I'll look back to the case officer as to whether that's specifically addressed in the report already, but that is the mechanism by which the local planning authority secures the delivery of affordable housing alongside open market dwellings, and it does that by operating on a prohibition. It will say that the owner cannot cause or permit the occupation of more than X number of dwellings until X number of affordable housing units have been provided and are ready to be occupied. Equally, the Section 106 agreement will also normally require, and I've not seen the draft on this occasion, but it would also normally require an affordable housing scheme which is delivered up front, normally prior to commencement of the development, which identifies the tenure mix of the affordable housing, which picks up on a point, Chairman, that you made today, and that is submitted to the local planning authority for approval, so that the local planning authority is very clear before development commences as to what tenure of affordable housing it's got and when they are to be delivered. And the Section 106 itself manages the delivery of affordable housing as against open market dwellings, as against set criteria. And you'll know that from the outset, because the Section 106 agreement will contain that detail at the start as for the whole scheme.
Thank you. Was there anything else, Sarah?
I was just going to add, and I think Ben slightly covered it in his answer, but in terms of your question, your specific question in relation to whether we can condition a minimum percentage to be rented, we can't condition it, but we can require it of a clause of the legal agreement.
Okay. And what sort of percentage could we perhaps be talking about?
So the current core strategy indicates that a starting point for discussion would be 70% rented, 30% shared ownership. We wouldn't be able to require anything over and above that 70%, but we could certainly start negotiations at 70% for the rented within the agreement.
Just one other related question to the affordable housing. You referred to an affordable housing company approved by the Isle of Wight Council. Can you tell me when Capture Housing were actually approved by the Isle of Wight Council?
Now you're testing me, Brady. From memory, it was in conjunction with development in East Cowes, and I would say in around, I want to say 2015-16, and that seems to be falling in line with what Mr. Bolt is thinking. So yeah, around 2015-16 from memory.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Critchison, Claire.
Could I just clarify the amount of, looking at the impact on the environment, the amount of trees? I think it was mentioned how many were in the SANG itself, but how many in the overall application with everything? And also, you mentioned the amount of allotments as well. How many was that? I just wanted to clarify those. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I confirm that the allotments, based on the size, depending on what split you have. So bear with me. I've got some specific calculations. So a standard size B or C range from 162 square metres to 334 square metres. So if you're using that metric, the area would secure 8 allotments based on the square meterage of the area if you round down, because you can't have half an allotment, or 4 allotments if you use the larger element, which is why I've said between 4 and 8. But you can also get a different type, because allotments apparently are also measured in poles, dating back to Anglo-Saxon time, and a traditional allotment would be 10 poles, which is the equivalent of 250 metres squared. By that metric, the land would deliver 5.7 allotments, so you'd probably be looking at 5 allotments. So, which is why when I was referring to earlier, I said between 4 and 8, because it depends on what size parameter you use. I will be honest, off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact number of trees being planted as part of the scheme.
2,500 was referenced earlier.
But 2,500 was referenced earlier.
Was that just part of the SANG, or was that the whole, including every tree-lined street that we were talking about?
My understanding is that is just the SANG. That's just the kind of SANG, which is going to have effectively a beefing the additional tree line around the edge of the site.
Some of us of a certain age will remember school exercise books that used to explain what roofs and perches and all that sort of stuff were, and poles, I think, and it brought me back to my youth. Well, there we go. Any other questions? Councillor Critchison, Claire.
Just about these trees as well. Obviously, when we were on site, we saw some very well established trees there, and I noticed from the plans that most of those were staying. Could we just confirm if any of those are being taken away?
Thank you, Chairman. That's definitely in the report, because I remember writing it. So it definitely refers to the number of trees that are going to be removed, and it's very limited. So section 6.115 of the report details specifically what elements will be removed. So in 6.116, you've got a total number of 7 individual trees will be removed. 2 times grade A, 2 times grade B, 3 times grade C, and a further 7 U-grade trees would be removed. So a U-grade tree is generally one where it's unsafe for retention anyway. But all those trees, the U-grade trees, are along the route of the Marlborough Road link. But they include 2 apples, an oak, 3 ash, and then another dead tree that hasn't been identified because it was completely dead. So that section goes through, together with the above, 2 small groups would be removed to facilitate development, but that section should answer that question for you, hopefully.
Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to move us now into debate on the merits of this application. It's time to start giving an indication of what you think of this. Does anybody want to kick off? And does anybody want to give an indication of a proposal? Councillor Jarman, Chris.
I have a small remark to kick it off, if I may. Although I've expressed my predisposition against the loss of greenfield sites to build properties that local people cannot afford, I've not predetermined this planning application, as I know that each application must be decided in accordance with the new national planning policy, the framework issued on the 20th of July this year, our adopted island plan, and all other material considerations. I'm listening today to all of the material considerations and will then make up my mind on the basis of that statutory test. There's clear case law that those standing for office and those elected to office are entitled to, and indeed expected to, form policy views on a variety of matters, including related to town and country planning. I'm required to address the planning issues before me fairly and on their merits. I have seen aggressive letters about my participation today, and I suspect, as is true for all of us, I've also received heartfelt pleas from many island residents and local groups and been petitioned by our MP, all of which I've put aside. I've taken advice from our legal staff and our monitoring officer who consider that I have not predetermined this matter, nor is there evidence of the same, and therefore I have no interest at the beginning of this meeting to declare. I've carefully and will continue to carefully consider this application. I've read the papers, will continue to approach the decision-making process with an open mind, and will then exercise my vote given to me by virtue of my election and with the trust and by the grace of my electorate.
Thank you, Chris. And you did give me notice that you'd had advice from the monitoring officer and you wish to make that statement. Does anybody wish to contribute to the discussion regarding the merits of this application and perhaps make a proposal for us to consider? Councillor Quirk, Chris.
This is a very difficult application to consider. And it's the difference between heart and head. The heart says we want to protect the farm, we want to protect the rural nature of the area. But head says it's really hard to see any material planning concerns here. As a former chair of planning, I think the officer's report looks perfectly reasonable to me. And you, even when you get into human rights, people have a right somewhere to live. And we've got 2,200 family units on our housing waiting list, and that's just the desperate bit of the list. There's 20% of islanders live in poverty, so it's not an easy one to sort of just to weigh up. But on balance, I think I come out to support this application. I think it does give the opportunity for affordable housing, which we are in desperate need of as an island. And so I would move that we accept the, approve the application.
Thank you, Chris. Is there a seconder for that proposal? No seconder as such. Oh, sorry. Whoops. Councillor Brady. Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. I think if we were mindful to agree this, I think the point you rightly made earlier regarding the 70-30 rentable split would be very appropriate to have that as a condition. And I think if that was a condition, listening to all the debate, I would be mindful to propose that we accepted it with that extra condition that you quite rightly pointed out yourself.
And that was exactly what Mr. Gard was whispering to me. Okay. So we have a legitimate proposal here, proposed by Councillor Quirk, seconded by Councillor Brady. The proposal is to agree the conditional approval recommended by officers with the condition proviso that any affordable housing, 70% of it, should be for rent. That is the proposal. Now I'm going to open that up to debate. I'm not going to go straight to the vote. I'm going to give the opportunity for people to speak in favour of that, or to speak against, or to make an alternative proposal. Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Medland. John.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to speak against that proposal. I'm going to refer back to our 2012 plan, core strategy, SP4, tourism. Quote, the outstanding quality of the island's natural environment, historic and cultural offer are the key drivers that define the island as a visitor destination. 1.4 million staying visitors and 1.1 million day visitors to the island each year. So that's 2012. And also there's SP5, which looks at the environment, and the quotation, relevant quotation here is, development that has a demonstrable adverse impact on the island's natural, historic and built environments should be avoided. We can also think about policy DM7 about community infrastructure. I quote again, development proposals will be expected to consider the needs and requirements of all people in the community, both immediate and wider it will serve. We should also consider DM11, historic environment. Development proposals will be expected to relate to the conservation, enhancement and enjoyment of the island's heritage assets and public realm. Coming on to our current island plan, we have policy T1. The council will support proposals that reduce the impact on air quality and climate change. This is clearly not doing that, as in the other cases. And finally, looking at policy EV9, the council will support proposals that conserve, enhance and promote the seascapes and landscapes of the island. So in all those cases, this decision seems to be, to me, it's clear that this is not the right application to approve. It's a wrong design, as I've already alluded to. There's insufficient affordable housing, and there's no social housing here to meet our 2,500 people or 2,200 people on the housing list. It doesn't seem to have solved any of the problems. We have a huge number of houses already agreed to be built in the area. So, why are we then turning on a destruction of an existing economic asset, which with the plans that have been proposed, as we've heard today, could lead to employment, in the case of the community farm established in 2006, of 25 jobs, 25 people. There seems to be, to me, the balance is coming out against this application. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anybody else? Councillor Jarman. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened very carefully to the debate today, and there were a great number of documents to read beforehand. And I agree with Councillor Quirk that there is a matter of balance here. However, I think I also have to speak against agreeing this. There are a number of issues which leave me with quite considerable concerns. The first is the distinction between demand for housing and need for housing. I think in our draft island plan, which has already been circulated, and I'm not sure if it's officially out for comment, but given it was included in public papers, it is already the subject of public debate. And in there, we talk about the need very carefully. I'm sure the demand on the island is considerable. The need, however, is for something very specific as outlined in our plan. And I have to commend our planning department for the work they've done on that, which is a really excellent job. We are concerned, though, here with not simply numbers, but with location, type, and that a very interesting word of affordability. The location we've heard much about, with a large number of planning applications already in the vicinity, the type and affordability the same. And I don't feel that those issues have been fully addressed. The second issue I have grave concerns about is the issue of human rights. We're talking here about a family business, we're talking about livelihood and home. And I know there is a balance which the planning document has tried to bring. But I think here, when we are talking about the extraordinary decision to dismiss human rights, that requires extraordinary evidence. And I do not find that there is extraordinary evidence presented. I have further concerns about sustainability. We are all aware of the capacity issues on the island for utilities, and we're mindful of the recent events. And I feel, again, considerable concern at simply leaving it to utility to sort out the matter. As I understand as well that the wastewater from this site will intended to go through Sandown, which is itself the subject of ongoing debates with Standard Water. So, in conclusion, whilst the plan is not without merit, on such an extraordinary scale of development, I find no extraordinary justification to be proven, and I would therefore commend it for refusal.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else? Councillor Critchison, Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, I also feel that there's many commendable aspects to it, with the new rights of way, eco-charging, cycleways, but I don't feel any of it goes quite far enough, with not enough allocation for the allotments, the trees. I don't feel the SANG will bring anything to the area that we don't already have with the parks and beaches we have there. So I don't think that mitigates the loss of heritage and history, what we have as part of the Isle of Wight, what makes us us with our farming communities. And going forward, I think that would be a huge loss to our whole heritage here on the island. And I would also say that I don't feel that I could support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Anybody else? No. I'll make a comment myself, and if you bear with me from the chair. This is one of the most difficult applications I've seen in my years on this committee, which isn't as long as I've been a councillor. I think I first came out of this committee back in about 2016, so only about 5 years. But it is, I'm aware I had the largest housing application on the island in a generation within my ward, the Pan Meadows development, 12 years ago, which took a great green lung off the eastern side of Newport, but at the same time provided 250 affordable homes, and at the time was the most significant affordable housing build the island had seen in many a year and since. I represent those people, 80% of whom, not 70, 80% were affordable rented, and the balance were equity shared ownership. And whilst as a councillor at the time I had major reservations about it, I was relaxed personally at the affordable housing, because that is one of the main reasons I became a councillor, because of the deficiency of affordable, preferably social to be frank, but we're not going to get that with capture. But the deficiency of affordable housing on the island for people who will never be able to afford even some of the figures that Mr. Long read out, because they're on minimum wage, whatever it's called by this government, minimum wage or fixed or 0-hour contracts, etc., etc. People who are living in private rented housing, which is overwhelmingly subsidised by the taxpayer because the rents are extortionate and unaffordable for people. People whose families are growing up in their parents' homes because there's nowhere else for them to live. People where parents are sleeping on sofas in living rooms of their mothers and fathers. And I think one of the human rights, I don't know if it's covered by the Act, I'm not a lawyer, or the human rights of everybody after a hot meal every day is a shelter. Years ago, I used to be a member of shelter. I'm not anymore, but it's one of the most important things. And when you're on planning, it's always making this judgment, this balanced judgment. And I've listened very carefully to the representations by particularly Mrs. Holliday and Mr. Gaskin on behalf of the other two people, and they were important contributions. I think what Captiva, the applicants, have said, well, it rubs me up the wrong way, a lot of what they say, to be frank. But just because I'm rubbed up the wrong way doesn't mean to say I won't make the right decision. As the chair, I am going to vote in favour of this application because of the affordable housing. There are 70% of 166, my arithmetic's not as good as it used to be, but it's going to be around about 120 affordable rented homes. And provided Capture Housing manage those properly and effectively, then I will be content. I'm assured that they will. Let's see what happens. That's my view. It's not something I take any pleasure in saying, but sometimes on planning you have to do the right thing, and a roof over the head of more people than one family, and I feel very sorry for that one family, but it is about the greater good. The greater good is what counts in my attitude to life. Does anybody else wish to contribute? In which case, I will inform you I have to the second, I have to the proposal is. Sorry, the proposal is for approval to support conditional approval as recommended by the officers, with the proviso, I don't think we can call it a condition, that in the section 106, a clause in the section 106, that the affordable housing will be required to have 70% of it affordable for rent. That is the proposal. Are you okay with that, Chris? You okay with that? You work, Paul, obviously. Okay. I'm going to put that to the vote then. All those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3.
All those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
And abstentions?
1.
I declare that vote lost. I now seek an alternative proposal, presumably from people who wish to refuse this application. Is there a proposal?
Yeah, I move to refuse the application.
Councillor Drew, thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Critchison, thank you. We have that proposal. I don't think there's any need. Councillor Quirk, Chris?
Before the planning officers say it, they've got to give the reason for the refusal.
Because this is against officer recommendation, you will need to come up with a reason for why this should be refused. I think in the past there's been a bit of an approach that will let the officers sort that out. But I think we've all had recent training. Do you have any proposal, any reasons for why you wish to refuse it, Councillor Drew or Councillor Richardson?
Yeah, well, I think on the first point, if I'm not mistaken, the case law says that we don't strictly need to provide a reason, but I'm very happy to do so anyway. I think, to my mind, in many countries, there would be a constitutional absolute prohibition in terms of the human rights argument, in terms of the dereliction of our responsibility to ensure that not only in relation to the farm, which is owned by an individual, but also for future generations. And I think we need to make sure that we're not balancing things purely on the basis of being some person's home, some person's business. This is also something which I think echoes down the corridors in terms of how residents in the future will utilise this space. I think, to my mind, this balancing argument hasn't been made out. There are some very good, very positive aspects to the development, but to my mind, on balance of probability, I would suggest that it doesn't quite meet that, and for that reason, I'm against.
Well, as ever in these situations, and I've sat and watched them many times before, and I've seen Chris do this, you know, the officers will try and work with that. But I don't really think you're giving them a lot, to be honest, Warren. We need planning reasons that are defensible in an appeal. Referring to what might happen in another country's constitution isn't really that helpful, I'm afraid.
No, I appreciate that. Well, I think then in terms of the amenity of the neighbourhood, I think to my mind, you know, one of the issues is that we have an assumption about the number of cars of each household. I'm not entirely convinced in terms of the load on the network, the amenity to neighbouring properties, and indeed to the standard of living of those people within this development, that is necessarily going to tend towards the good in a general sense. I think I have reservations regarding, for example, the rat run issue that's been raised, and I think that in terms of density, this is a development which I don't feel properly addresses that. What we need on the island, I feel, are more appropriate housing for, as you've said, Councillor Brodie, it needs to be affordable. I think it probably should be social as well, and I'm not necessarily convinced that this is the right type of developments at the current time.
Just bear with me a second.
I'm going to, if okay, Chairman, I'm going to have to come in on a couple of those points and just advise. I think Ben will also potentially have to come in on other points as well. What I've taken from what you've just said is concerns over to the amenity of the neighbourhood due to the number of cars on the network, which you question, the standard of living for the resultant residents, the potential impact of the rat running, the density of the development, and the affordable housing that you feel it should be more social rented. I'm just going to come back on each of those points and advise members of what weight to give to those elements. In terms of cars on the network, not only do you have a submission from Island Roads that satisfies that it's subject to the conditions and the 106 agreement, it won't have an impact on the network in relation to traffic generation. The model used to determine the number of cars is a standard national model. We cannot go against a TRICS standard model and say we disagree that is the number of cars that will be generated by a one-bedroom house, by a two-bedroom house, by residential development. It is a standard process. I'm looking to Mr. White for his agreement in terms of that is how you determine the potential traffic generation from a scheme. I would significantly warn against members saying that that is incorrect, unless they can provide evidence as to how they believe traffic generation should be determined and what their evidence and experience is to stipulate that. In terms of the standard of living, I would need to understand more in terms of what is referenced there in relation to the density of the development is significantly under any the kind of modern day development, I would say, as a term. I don't think I referenced the existing density per hectare, but I believe it's in and around 25. I'm looking to the developer if they see, but we don't know. I can check that, but or we'll put the plan back up that shows the urban grain density thing, which might be useful. But from my perspective, there is and I can't remember the exact, I've read it in some of the documentations, but I know it's under 35 dwellings per hectare, and the standard for historically for developments has been between 35 and 70 dwellings to the hectare. This application is definitely below the stipulated 35. So I would significantly warn against any reason for refusal that raises concerns over the proposed density of the development, considering the level of green space that's proposed as part of this scheme, which is significantly above what we have seen on a significant number of other developments recently approved across the island. I'm going to just share with members again the density slide in terms of when you look at comparisons in the area, and how you balance that in the contradictory nature of what we're saying, and that if we're saying actually we need more smaller units, we need more affordable units, you are going to up the density of a development. Therefore, you cannot specifically relate to number and area. There has to be a harm associated with that density. If you look at this urban grain plan, I would dispute anyone could stipulate that the density of the proposed development is significantly above that seen in the adjoining area. So I would advise against that as a point. In terms of rat running, I suppose it's a difficult one. The road is designed to be 30 miles an hour. That is my understanding, is that that is the nature of the road. There is narrowings. The internal road network allows for different materials to actually reduce speeds, different surface materials to reduce speeds. So what my answer to the previous question was, one must ask themselves, is it a negative to have a rat running? I think to rely on the fact the development would result in rat running would be very dangerous in terms of that. The road is designed to be 30 miles an hour. If that was a specific concern, it could be overcome through the incorporation of speed features. As councillors will recall from the training we undertook, an application should never be refused if the matter can be overcome by conditions. So I would suggest that that matter could be dealt with if it was felt to be significant by conditions. In terms of the affordable housing, social housing element, the current policies of the core strategy require a development to provide 35% affordable housing. The application provides 35% affordable housing. We cannot categorically refuse an application if it complies with the policy requirement for that feature. So in terms of the points that I've drawn out from what you've said, I'm concerned that I'm still not clear what the impact on the amenity of the area is, and I need to understand that.
Thank you, Sarah, which puts in professional language what I was thinking, Councillor Drew, to be frank. You want to refuse it, but you're not giving us planning reasons. Councillor Medland, John.
Thank you, Chairman. I did mention in my quick ramble that I had picked up a few things I think we could be using. Strategic Plan 4 and Strategic Plan 5 on tourism and environment. I won't read out the quotations again, but I think they both give us grounds if we put weight on those particular areas to rebalance the argument. Also, to some extent, DM7, DM11, T1, EV7, EV9. So I think they're all potentially grounds where we could stress those elements against other elements. This is my feeling. It's a kind of a balance. It's expressing the balance of the argument, which I feel, to me, the argument's been expressed in one particular way, and I think we should be pushing it back the other way. So I mean, I know this is difficult for planning staff to do, and I hope for any help and advice from my much more experienced colleagues around the table.
Councillor Jarman, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I think earlier I mentioned some key issues which I was not satisfied on, and I would hope that those would all be quite significant grounds to refuse this. First of all, we do have a draft island plan, and I think great weight should be played to that draft island plan, particularly in the mix of properties which we talk about. I know it is only a draft, it is out for circulation, and I think on that basis we are allowed to take account of it in our discussions. I think that we've heard clear information about the number of building approvals in this particular area of the island, and therefore there is an issue not simply about the number and type of build, but their need in this specific area. The human rights issues, I believe, are quite compelling. I have heard no extraordinary evidence why we should dismiss them so readily. And one may follow the premise that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, but I find it difficult to dismiss the needs of the few in this case without a real compelling idea of why this number of properties are needed of this type in this specific area. So I think those are quite key issues. On infrastructure and sustainability, I'm mindful of the Island Road comment and their concern that this might add to local overload of traffic. One would suppose that 473 additional dwellings would add a considerable burden to the local area, which is already at times, for those of us who pass through it, under some stress. And within that, I would encompass concerns regarding the surgery, for which there is no decision to actually build it, and no GP who has currently come forward to take it on. So it remains a concept rather than a commitment at this time. I've talked earlier about the utilities under the heading of sustainability as well. And I think with the issues of flooding which are in the documentation and the concerns which have been expressed about the capacity of the current installation there, that would further raise difficulties in agreeing to it. And then finally, I would raise issues relating to design and to environmental sustainability. My colleague, Councillor Medland, earlier referred to the 2025 deadline regarding gas installations. And there is nothing in here which provides me with any indication that these properties will have ground source heat pumps, will have solar gain for the roof space, or indeed that they will be recycling any of the water components. So in terms of all of the environmental impacts, I would find it to fail quite egregiously. So a number of issues there, I believe that was 7, and I'll leave the planning officers to add that to their consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. I'm going to bring in the Strategic Manager for Planning and Infrastructure, Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillors, I think it's only proper that I draw to your attention a couple of points from the discussion and the position that Councillor Medland and Jarman have just been putting forward. Both councillors have referred to reliance on the emerging island planning strategy, which is quite correct. A decision has been made by the local authority cabinet to issue that draft document for public consultation. That public consultation starts on the 30th of July. Now, the important point for councillors to be mindful of here is set out in paragraph 47 and 48 of the MPPF. Now, I readily accept that weight can be given to an emerging local plan. However, I think your professional officers would advise completely against attaching weight to policies of an emerging local plan that is, it's such an early stage of its infancy, it hasn't even been through public consultation, yet alone examination or testing. I would put forward to councillors that the provision that allows for weight to be given to emerging local plans is really when those local plans have got to the examination stage or are well developed. In this case, we are not in that position, and as such, I do not think that a reason for refusal based upon those emerging policies could be sustained. In fact, I'd probably go as far to say that they would be considered to be unreasonable behaviour in a planning appeal scenario. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ollie. Okay.
Could Ms. Wilkinson?
Yes, of course. Yeah. And Ms. Wilkinson, Sarah.
Thank you very much. I think I've noted down the points that were covered in both of those, and I think I just need to come back on a few of them, just to make sure that we give a sustainable, if we're going for a reason, it is sustainable. Firstly, in terms of the comments in relation to the distinction between need and demand, the nature of units and the type and the need for them in this area, I would draw members' attention to the first paragraph of the evaluation of this report in relation to need, and remind members of the previous training they've had, or councillors, apologies, in relation to this matter. The local planning authority are in a presumption in favour of development in relation to the significant housing delivery needs of the island and our inability to have hit that historically. We have concluded as part of that elements of SP1 and SP2 are out of date. We cannot rely on them. Therefore, we cannot refuse an application without being significantly subject to challenge on the basis of need. There is an established position that there is a significant need for housing on the island. We are failing to deliver. So I would be very concerned if councillors sought to incorporate any reference to need within the reason for refusal, if that was the route they were going. In terms of the objections to the design and the environmentally sustainable features, I don't fully understand the comment in terms of design. I'm presuming that is one and the same thing, design in relation to the sustainability features. And I would solely say the proposal would provide sustainable features in accordance with the current requirements of building control standards. There is nothing that requires them to go over and above that. And I would raise concerns over the requirement for them to do so. It is accepted that in the future, gas boilers will no longer be allowed by the government, but that is not the position now. That does not, we don't control that the use of energy on that site shall be gas. If that was the proposal, then yes, we would be in a very difficult position if we were saying it must be gas and we knew that over the course of this development, gas would no longer be available. That is not the proposal. We're not stipulating that they will be gas-fired boilers. The developer would be perfectly within their rights to utilise gas boilers for the first couple of years and then change them should they wish to comply with the requirements of the legislation. So I would raise concerns over the reference to that element. In terms of the comments in relation to island roads, concerns over the capacity of the network, as I've previously said, island roads haven't objected subject to the conditions and the terms of the legal agreement. There is an impact on the network providing those things can be achieved. Officers are stating that through the legal agreement and through conditions, those things can be achieved. In terms of the surgery, what I suppose I'm struggling with in terms of understanding how to incorporate that into a reason for refusal would be how I would suggest we couldn't refuse an application because we don't consider one of the proposed elements of it is needed. The proposal seeks a doctor's surgery. Yes, you can give limited weight to that in your consideration if you feel that that surgery won't be delivered, but if the application for this development was solely for a doctor's surgery, you could not refuse an application for a doctor's surgery because you didn't consider there to be a need for one or a GP prepared to take one on, unless there was harm associated with the provision of the building for a GP surgery. So I would be concerned over that element. In relation to the policies that are referenced, if it was proposed to refuse it on SP4 tourism, I would ask members to draw out a little more what the impact on tourism would be in relation to the visibility of the development from the surrounding area, as referenced in the report. I'd need to understand that a bit more in terms of how it would impact on tourism, in terms of that harm. I would advise against SP5 because if members read SP5, it references designated areas, SPAs, triple SIs. The site is not within any of those designations. So it would be a dangerous policy to reference. Reference has also been made to DM7 and DM11, I believe. Should members consider, and I think this was picked up by Councillor Critchelson, that there is a significant harm to there is harm to the loss of the heritage landscape, the historic landscape, and therefore that is DM11 references that element and the harm associated with the loss of the historic landscape. That is a point that members may wish to consider if that is substantial enough to refuse the application on those grounds. And then reference was made to DM7, which is social and community infrastructure. And I suppose I would just ask clarification in relation to what of the site falls within the definition of community infrastructure and social infrastructure that would be losing, because that is referenced in the report in terms of then what is being provided in terms of social and community infrastructure. I would also raise concerns over a reason for refusal in relation to utility services. The application does propose to drain to the main system, and that is all they need to demonstrate. The discussions between the developer and Southern Water in terms of that process and the monetary value associated with that connection is not relevant to planning in terms of that proposal. They do propose to link to the network, and so officers consider, our advice would be that is sufficient for terms of the application. So we would advise against that. And I think that covers all of the kind of the elements. And so I'm still unsure of where I'm going in terms of a reason, with the exception of potentially the heritage element. The other thing, sorry, if I may, Chairman, I just wanted to add was reference has been made a number of times to no extraordinary justification. And I would just like to highlight to members that we are in a position of a presumption in favour of development unless material considerations justify otherwise. So that the balance, comments have been raised during the day that balance is skewed in favour. Balance must be skewed in favour. That is what the policies require. So we're not looking at an extraordinary justification to approve the development. We're looking for an extraordinary reason to refuse it. And I think members must keep that in mind. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sarah. So again, you know, sitting here, I'm still not, well, I'm certainly not hearing anything extraordinary in terms of refusing this application. You've come up with a number of issues. Professional officers have advised you very strongly. You know, the phrase, you know, significantly advise against has been used repeatedly by Miss Wilkinson. I'm, you know, as the chair, I'm entirely comfortable with whatever you propose, provided it is sustainable. You can't just be against it. That is not, to be frank with you, from my point of view, you can't sit there and just expect the officers to make up something that they're going to have to defend if they don't think it's defendable. So what I'm going to do, because we've been going for 2¼ hours now, and I need a comfort break, I'm going to have a 10-minute break now. And I would just invite you, those who are against it, to have a conversation as to how you can do this. Take advice from the officers, but you really need to get something that is defensible and sustainable. Okay, so I'm going to stop it. It's now, I make it 13 minutes past 6, which is probably 1/4 by yours, Marie. So we'll come back together. Let's by 25 past 6. Okay, thank you. Just remind
whether you want to establish that effectively without opening the session again, or just do that through the session.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll recommence. Right, councillors and staff have had opportunities to discuss how this could be refused on sustainable, defensible grounds. You proposed refusal, Councillor Drew, and you seconded, Councillor Critcherson. I think you've had conversations with the staff. Are you okay if Sarah Wilkinson then just explains to you what she thinks that you think is the sustainable grounds for refusal? Is that okay? Yeah, okay. Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to quote from the report, actually, and I'm going to ask members, once I'm done, just to take a moment to read some paragraphs from the report, because I think that the discussion we've had and the comments that were raised, the element that was potentially sustainable relates to the loss of the historic kind of character polygons, I think was what was referred to. Firstly, I thought it'd be useful to incorporate them on the presentation to show councillors what we're referring to as those 4 polygons. That is what they are. What I want to just highlight is, firstly, I'm going to read from paragraph 6.193 of the report. I will ask members to read this whole section, and I will tell you which paragraphs. And I note I am going to reference the wrong paragraph of the MPPF, but this is in the update paper, so let me get that one right. So it refers to the fact that paragraph 2.3, or no, sorry, 203 of the MPPF states that the effect of an application on the significance of a non-designated heritage asset should be taken into account in determining a planning application. In weighting applications that directly or indirectly affect non-designated heritage assets, which is what this is, a balanced judgment will be required having regard to the scale of the harm, of any harm or loss of the significance of the heritage asset. I then want to draw members' attention to paragraph 6.192 of the report that clarifies that although it is noted that the landscape character assessment, which identifies these 4 polygons, it is noted that neither that historic landscape characterisation or the historic environment record ascertains significance to the historic landscape character. It is therefore difficult to specifically identify the level of harm to the significance. If something doesn't identify the significance of an asset, you would be determining that the harm associated with the loss of that significance outweighs all of the benefits associated with the development. So that is a balance I need members to really carefully consider in their deliberations here. One point to also bear in mind, and it is covered in the report, and so I think it's fair to highlight it, is that in the socio-economic factor of the report, we highlight that the application would result in a new homes bonus if approved. If the application is refused and later allowed to appeal, the council would not get any new homes bonus. And I think that's just an important clarification of that point.
To make the point, that's not a material consideration, it is for wider awareness.
Yeah, and just for clarification, it's not a material consideration. It's just a point that we want you to be aware of in your deliberations, but it's not a material consideration. So just for clarification, it's not a material consideration. But I would then ask members, before we potentially look further at this suggested reason for refusal relating around the loss of the historic landscape, I would ask members to just read paragraphs 6.189 through to paragraphs 6.195 of the report. That is the heritage section. I think if members are considering they wish to put the significance of weight on the loss of the historic landscape over and above the benefits of the scheme, I need you to read that paragraph and satisfy yourselves that that weighting is correct. So I would just, if possible, ask members to do that. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, sir. Did you want to come in and say something? No, no, okay. Right, then I'm going to just leave you to a few moments to read the paragraph suggested on page 69 and 70 of your report. Okay, how you doing? You all okay? Right. Just wait for Marie to come back and then we'll start. So. Lost Ben and Marie. Sorry about this. We've lost our legal advisor and our clerk now. I don't know. Oh, here he is, and here she is. Okay. Right, you've all had the opportunity to read that. Is there anything further, Sarah, you wanted to say?
Thank you, Chairman. In that context, thank you, members, for taking the time to read that. I appreciate it. I'd also highlight that just to clarify, when we're talking about the historic landscape and the points that councillors are referring to, draw members' attention to paragraph 5.4, which is the council's archaeology officer's comment, where she has confirmed that there would not be any unacceptable impacts on above or below ground heritage assets and the setting of designated heritage assets, but concerns have been raised that there would be an impact on the historic landscape character. So it's that impact and historic landscape character that I understand that members are referring to. So in light of that, if we were to take that as the reason for refusal, we would be looking at something along the lines of the application would result in the loss of historic landscape character, the significance which is considered to be substantial. The proposed development would therefore be contrary to policy DM11. My health warning in relation to that reason for refusal, although it's been drafted, is that we cannot substantiate the substantial. So as worded, it says the application would result in the loss of historic landscape character, the significance of which is considered to be substantial. That is considered, it's how you define substantial. I've already confirmed, and as stipulated in the report, the degree of significance has not been attributed to it in the studies the council has produced. So members would be putting a significance against that over and above everything else. And I just want to make sure members are aware of that in that deliberation. But from what has been said, that is all I can pull out as a reason for refusal, unless I'm interpreting anything incorrectly. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor Drew, do you accept that as a reason you wish to have for refusal?
Could we have a moment to confer, if I may?
Sorry?
May I have a moment to confer with colleagues?
Yes, of course.
Thank
Yes.
you. I think just broadly, that does encapsulate many of my concerns, and I think that certainly touches upon the issue of the human rights argument. And I think, for me, although I appreciate what you said with regards to that potentially not being a substantive point, I do think that there is EU jurisprudence which we haven't perhaps considered, but that's not maybe a matter for this committee, and I appreciate that. I know that my colleagues have concerns with regards to the motion that I have put forwards. They may wish to say something in addition to that, but I would certainly agree with those issues. I think the significance clearly of this asset, it's something which is a matter for evidence. It's going to be a matter for potential planning appeal. But to my mind, I think this is a heritage asset, one that has a big impact and may have a bigger impact in the future. I appreciate that's not material. But certainly the significance as a cultural and historic one is.
Councillor Critchison, are you?
I would like to add to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Yes, I don't think enough significance had been put on that in this report, that there would be a significant loss of the culture and heritage integrity of our island life, of what we are made up of, and the farming need. I feel that needs much more significance to our island.
So we now have a formal proposal.
Sorry, Chair, can we?
Yes, please do.
Apologies, Chairman. I think in terms of those comments, thank you, Councillor Christensen. I'm happy that we amend the wording, subject to the agreement of the proposer, to incorporate the terms heritage and culture. What I would advise against is reference to the farm element, purely in relation to the, obviously, policy position in relation to the loss of the farm relates to best value agricultural land. It doesn't relate specifically to the farming activity of the site. It's a dairy farm. It doesn't, policies do not protect dairy farms. So it's how you would wish us to incorporate the reference to the farming activity within the reason for refusal, within the confines of the policy surroundings. So we can incorporate that the impact would be substantial on the heritage and culture of the local area. And I actually had reference to the Isle of Wight as a whole. And so we can add, contrary to DME level, like the impact, substantial proposed development, and the impact, the wording we'll have to play with, subject to members of the councillor's agreement, on the heritage and culture of the local area and island as a whole. If that's how members want to go, I would advise against it, but that would be if I'm taking those points on board.
Well, I think in terms of my concerns, clearly, for me, this is about Ryde and the actual, the environment surrounding it, the neighbourhood directly impacted. But I'm not sure to what extent my colleagues may wish to ventilate their views.
Councillor Medland, you indicated, John.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought there's a whole bunch of things I want to say, actually, because I think this was, we could broaden this out a great deal. I'm not quite sure why we've gone down this particular route of historic environment. It was always clear from the report that it had little planning value. But I think it was important to look at this in context of the area. I think, as Councillor Drew has just said, we've got to look at this area where we've got a huge amount of, well, we've got the largest conurbation on the island. We've got a huge amount of planning which has already been approved around the area, which raises the value, I feel, of Westridge Farm much higher than it would normally be. Say it was in God's Hill or somewhere. I think it's a bit different. So I think this brings up policy EV8. Right, it's not high quality agricultural land, but it's the only land. It's also extremely good for what it is. It's pasture. And it's a damn good piece of land for pasture. It's excellent for dairy farming. It has a value, although it's relatively low compared to, say, arable, you know. But, you know, you've got to think of it in the context. It's surrounded by a conurbation. It's quite unique. So I think that gives it a value far higher than normal planning would give it. I also wonder, Ms. Wilkinson, why we cannot include the huge amounts of evidence that we've received in terms of the letters and emails and various opinions that have been given by local residents. That, to me, suggests there is a great cultural value, and I think that is evidence, quantifiable evidence, which we could use. And I don't understand why we are kind of excluding the huge outpouring of public interest in this subject. Personally, I feel it is possible to write a different balanced version, you know, preferring refusal. I'd be happy to help planning officers to come up with wording, because I think there is, to me, there is quite a lot of evidence and there's quite a lot of arguments that we have. I mean, we've mentioned a whole number of them. I've just come up with another one, but I mean, we've talked about how many did you have just now? 8, 9? And I think, you know, we do have a range, rather than concentrating on one at a time. There are a lot of different things, and we still haven't really resolved this human rights issue, which seems to be absolutely fundamental today.
I hear everything that you say, John, but you've been given advice by the planning officers that they're giving you significant warning of something of the things that you're raising are not sustainable or defensible. You've already, when you spoke, referred to the island planning strategy, which has been explained by Mr. Bolter, is frankly not relevant in this because it hasn't even been out to consultation.
Sorry, Chair, I was referring to the previous plan, the 2012.
No, you refer to E8, which is in the new plan. Yes, it is in the new plan. Yes, thank you. The issue is I'm just going to remind members of the committee, recently we had a training course on the next difficult planning application, the oil well in Arraton, where I think the person who was given the training, who was a head of planning in Northumberland County Council for nearly 20 years, I think was quite surprised that members didn't come up for the reasons for refusal when they went against officer recommendations. Now, all I'm saying to you, I'm trying to strike a balance here between the four of you who are against this, but you're not coming up with sustainable reasons other than the heritage one. It's like you're throwing everything in that they can't possibly defend. You can't expect, officers to defend the unreasonable. Now, every single one that Chris Jarman produced, Sarah addressed. Everything that Warren produced, most of which was entirely immaterial, was addressed. And I'm sat here frustrated because, as I said earlier, I'm quite relaxed, whatever decision we make, but I want it to be a planning decision. This is a planning committee. We have to make decisions on planning grounds. And what I'm hearing, frankly, apart from the heritage stuff and the culture stuff I think the officers are desperately trying to find something for you, but you're not helping them. Councillor Jarman, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I think the way forward here is probably to look at the phrase, and we should thank Sarah for coming up with this. If we were to use the phrase loss of valuable historical, heritage, cultural and community asset, I think that encompasses the key elements. Yes, at the end of the day, the backbone here is the loss of the farm, of course, and the farm is part of that cultural, community, heritage asset. The two are one and the same. They are on the same piece of land. They are appreciated within the same community. They share the same heritage. So I think the backbone of it is those four words, the loss of valuable historical, heritage, cultural and community asset. Now, we all know that as we were discussing polygons, a nice mathematical term, there are many facets to this. And I think we've made very clear what we see value in those other facets, particularly the human rights element, which if we were to turn that polygon on one of its sides, that would become the cornerstone of this issue. But that is also part of one and the same. That same historical, heritage, cultural and community asset is the farm. It is represented in the human rights of the people who are there, and it is an essential part of the community. So I think if we can accept that phrase, which is a very small variation, I think, on what Sarah proposed anyway, forgive me if I don't recall the exact detail of it, I think we would have a way forward.
Well, I think you can propose what you want. At the end of the day, you will get warnings from officers, but if that's what you wish to propose, we will put it to the vote. I'm not good. They can't instruct you. You are the members of the committee. You are the members of the council.
Yes, Chair, and I'm happy to hear back from Sarah on what she thinks of that variation to her initial proposal.
Thank you, Chairman. I would advise against reference to community asset, purely because community asset is defined in planning terms. There's a section in this in the report, and a farm is not classified as a community asset. It's not a community facility. They may have aspirations for the future in terms of providing a community asset, but it's not currently, doesn't fall within the definition of a community asset. That is covered in the report. I can find the specific reference to the paragraphs if councillors need it. But I would advise caution in relation to that. In relation to the historic character and landscape asset, yes, it is. You can consider it one of those. So from what's been said by, I think, all of you at some point, is that we are potentially looking at not solely looking at the historic asset, but the landscape as well. And reference was made to the pasture land in the discussions that have been had. So the potential revision that I think encompasses what you're trying to say, with the exclusion of the community element of it, would be that the application would result in the loss of an area of northeastern pastureland and a historic landscape, which would have an impact on the heritage and culture of the area, contrary to DM11.
Chris, Councillor Jarman, are you content to propose that now?
I am, Chair.
Would anybody second that? Yes, thank you, Councillor Critchison. Councillor Drew, are you happy to withdraw your earlier proposal?
I am, Chair.
Are you, Councillor Critchison? Thank you very much. Right, I've still got people indicating they wish to speak. The next one was Councillor Critchison. Claire.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak again on that the historic landscape characterisation and how it would be significant. It says, you know, in 6.192 how you have said there that the development on these polygons would be significant and the impact would be significant. So that's, I just go along with what that proposal that fits with that. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Quirk, Chris.
Whilst it's perfectly reasonable to get officers to put into planning terms the recommendations, it is not acceptable to be expecting officers to find the justification. And I think you're putting too much on officers already, suggesting that they find it. It is down to the people on the committee to identify what the planning issues are. And so I would just, it comes back down to what I said before about heart and head. Yeah, the heart says we want to keep the farm, we want to keep the historic area. But the head, for those of us who've been around in planning for a while, says, I can't see any material planning issues here. And I think you're grasping at straws. This is likely to be just a political gesture. I don't like political gestures. I'm not into gesture politics. Making a gesture to say we'll turn it down, just for it to be overturned by the planning inspectorate because we don't have a strong enough case. I think if you're going to turn it down, you've got to have something a bit stronger than what we've got now.
I would just like to speak, you know, with Councillor Quirk's comments there, that speaking with the heart and the head, mine is reversed in what you're saying. I know there is a significant need for housing, but I don't think it should be at the loss of the historical characterisation of areas. That balance for some people is one way and some people is the other. And I think we can't put that weighting, that is a different balance, the different is we're all weighting that differently. And I think that's, you know, I'm saying that there is more weight on this being significant, as, you know, there are, you know, I think I said earlier on that there were many commendable aspects to this, but that it didn't go far enough to mitigate the loss of the characteristics that we would lose. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, and one more comment, and that's going to be by me. And I entirely agree with Councillor Quirk. I've said, Martin, I'll bring you in next. Councillor Oliver Martin.
Thank you, Chair, for cutting in. The paragraph or the pages we were asked to read in making that, you know, judgment in as much as, you know, when I look back through it, the heritage side, every time you read it, the archaeological mitigations are negligible. The officer does not object to this. He does not object to that. I will find it very hard to go against an officer who knows what he's doing. I'm not into archaeology, but these people are. They know what they're doing, and they wouldn't put it in a report, you know, if they didn't know, you know, what it meant and everything else. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Martin. And finally, just my own comment, as I was saying, I agree with Councillor Quirk. I think when you go against officers' decisions, it's incumbent upon councillors to come up with material reasons why they're refusing it. I think we put the officers through a bit of a mill tonight to come up with something, but you've got your proposal. I oppose it because I think it's unsustainable. I think it's tenuous in the extreme, and I think it smacks of a desperate attempt. It's about heart rather than head. Okay, I'm going to put to the vote the proposal from Councillor Jarman, seconded by Councillor Critchison, to refuse the application. Against officer's recommendation, it will be a named vote because it's against an officer's recommendation. You know the reasons, I think, regarding the heritage that Sarah's been through. Does any of you need to be reminded of it? You're all okay with it? Right, all those in favour of the refusal, please show. Do I do it? Yeah, go on.
Councillor Critchison, Councillor Drew, Councillor Jarman and Councillor Medland.
And all those against?
Councillor Brading, Councillor Quirk, Councillor Oliver and Councillor Brodie.
Chairman, in the event of a tied vote, you have a second and casting vote.
In which case I vote against. Therefore, that falls. Is there any other proposal on this application? Councillor Oliver.
Chair, I abstained.
Oh, sorry. We have to have an extension of the time allowed because we were up to the 3 hours. Can I suggest that we extend the time for up to a maximum of 30 minutes? Okay, is that with everybody okay? All right, thank you. Sorry? No, not if you want to vote, you have to stay. Sorry, Claire. Okay, just for half an hour, but hopefully quicker. Right, Councillor Oliver, you were saying?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, first time round, I abstained on the application. It's a difficult one. My heart is telling me to do one thing. And I was waiting for an argument to overrule my head. But to be honest, I haven't found it. We cannot just ignore officer recommendations. I'm sorry. There is a presumption to support the application, and I really was hoping that there would be a good enough point to refuse the application. But due to the material facts not being strong enough, I'm proposing that the application be accepted, Chair.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Quirk. Can I propose an amendment that the affordable housing element within the section 106 should be at 70% rented?
Yeah. It is in the Constitution. It's only for councils, public documents. But if you happen to say actually, at least 61% of those paying influence, even 75%, and see if the officers would agree with that.
Okay. I'm advised I can't propose 70%, so I amend that to 71%. Would you accept that? Would you accept that? Thank you. Okay. Any comments on that? We'll put it to the vote then. So it is a proposal to vote to support the officer's recommendation for conditional approval, subject to any affordable housing be at 71% rented. Okay, everybody understands that? All those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4.
All those against?
1, 2.
Abstentions?
1, 2.
That's carried. The application is approved. Right, we'll finish the rest of the meeting. The only thing is item 5, members' question time. To guarantee a reply, a question must be submitted in writing. Did we have any, Marie? No. Does anybody have any questions? No. Okay then. Well, that's the end of the agenda. Thank you for your endurance through what was a long and difficult meeting, and I formally close the meeting.